Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Honor to him, the Blessed One, the Worthy One, the fully enlightened One. My utmost respect to the perfectly enlightened Samma Sambuddha, the noble doctrine of the Buddha, and the noble Mahasangha, the disciples of the Buddha. Hello, dear Dhamma friends. Welcome to the Dhamma Talk series organized by Dhamma USA. Under this weekly Dhamma Talk series, we cover some important topics on Buddhism to help benefit our community around the world. This effort will surely open up more horizon of Dhamma knowledge. All the viewers, please post your questions in the comment section of Dhamma USA YouTube channel so that Venerable Bhante can answer them at the end of the talk. And today we are so delighted to have Venerable Ajahn Kovilo. Bhante, Venerable Ajahn Kovilo is an Ohio-born monk who, having been introduced to meditation through Goenkaji tradition, first entered the monastery in 2006. After receiving full ordination from Venerable Ajahn Pasanno and Venerable Ajahn Amaro at Abhayagiri Buddhist Monastery in California in 2010, Venerable Ajahn Kovilo spent the next decade training at monasteries in the Ajahn Chah tradition in America and Thailand. In 2020, after a year practicing at a Pa Auk Sayadaw monastery, Ajahn Kovilo enrolled at the Dhamma Realm Buddhist University in California, where he is currently studying Pali and Sanskrit among other courses. Until the end of his formal studies, Venerable Ajahn Kovilo will be participating in the growing Clear Mountain Monastery community remotely and during winter as well as the summer breaks. After finishing his studies, Venerable Bhante will join the community in person on a more regular basis. It's an honor to welcome Venerable Ajahn Kovilo today. The topic is monking in America. Now, may I please request you, Venerable Ajahn Kovilo, to please start your Dhamma sharing? Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you. I'll just begin with the same greeting that Venerable Achanang did. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So greetings, everyone. I'm very happy to be here this morning. This is my first time joining the Dhamma USA platform. I met Bhante Sumita in Empty Cloud Monastery in New Jersey and was very delighted to meet him and am happy to be here with everyone today. So thank you for that very kind introduction, Achanam. So today I think that I will basically go through a bit of my biography again, but just not so much because my biography is anything especially interesting or unique, but because it's so common. There are so many things which were involved in my own coming to the Dhamma, coming to monastic life, coming into robes that are so very common for Westerners. So for people who didn't grow up in a Buddhist country, who didn't have the blessings to have been born in Sri Lanka or Thailand or Burma in this life, but came to the teachings later. There are certain patterns which you see again and again at international monasteries. And I think the details of my biography show many of these characteristics. So in these patterns. So I'll just talk about those and see how these patterns fit for people who may not have met many Western monks. So yes, as Ajahn mentioned, I was born in Ohio, born to a Unitarian family. That's a very liberal tradition. It's not even Christian. Basically, the main tenet is to have respect for all people. So a very beautiful ideal, but not very specific in its tenets and not very clear. You could say it's maybe not so swakato. It's not well expounded as the Dhamma is. So I grew up, had many different virtues that I was exposed to, but not such an overarching framework for how to live my life. At least that's how I experience these teachings of Unitarianism that I was exposed to. But then growing up as a normal American kid, high school student, then going from high school to university, becoming more interested in figuring out what life is really all about. And this is quite common, I think, for what you might call convert Buddhists. So this is a catch-all term for people who are not native-born Buddhists or were not born Buddhists, but people who converted later in life, is that usually people start to become interested in Buddhism maybe in their late teens or early 20s. And that was the case with myself. Not so interested in spirituality in high school, but then going from high school to university and seeing classes in my university. This is Hampshire University in Massachusetts, on comparative religions, and took a really wonderful class where we read the primary texts of Christianity and Judaism and Islam and Buddhism. So read the Dhammapada along with the Bible and the Quran and these various different holy books, the Tao Te Ching, etc. And so was becoming more and more interested in spirituality. And a friend of mine told me that he had done a Goenka retreat. So hopefully most people know what these are. These are 10-day Vipassana or insight retreats. You can find more information at dhamma.org, dhamma.org. But what these retreats do is basically allow people on a totally dana basis. So there's no cost for these retreats. In fact, you cannot even donate until you've sat one retreat, to come and really do a very deep dive into meditation for 10 days. You're introduced to 3 very clear techniques. So for the first 3 days of the retreat, you're doing meditation on the breath, paying attention to the in and out breath at the tip of the nose. Then for the next 6 days, so from day maybe 3.5 to day 9, you're paying attention to the sensations in the body from the top of the head down to the soles of the feet, and just watching these with equanimity. And then on the final day, you are practicing metta bhavana, or cultivation of loving kindness. And yeah, I was open to this retreat because my friend recommended it to me, and I entered into it. And Goenkaji, one of his extreme skills is being able to present Buddhism without letting people know that it's Buddhism. So he teaches in a very, what's called an ecumenical way. So he does not foreground or emphasize rituals. In fact, there's no Buddha Rupa. There's no statue of the Buddha in these Goenka courses. And for myself and for many Americans, Europeans, really all sorts of people around the world who are not Buddhist, that's very helpful, because people who are raised religious or even atheist can be turned off by signs of religiosity, by these different shows that something is being held up as holy, that we're not comfortable with or not familiar with. So I'm very grateful that these Goenka retreats did presented the teaching in this way. If there had been a big Buddha statue, or if Goenka-ji had said everyone has to bow, then I may have ran away on the very first day. But as it was, he did not do that. The centers are arranged in a very almost precise. They phrase it as being a science of the mind. And that was my experience. Come in as a Westerner, as a normal American college student who has no interest in religion, really, but want to train the mind. And he says, this is a science of the mind. Just learn these techniques. You're not paying attention to anything that's religious, no mantras, anything like that. Just watching phenomenon, the breath, the body, conditions and thoughts of loving kindness. And I could get my mind around that. And sitting this retreat just totally changed my life. The first 2 days, I experienced basically the dukkha of having a very untrained mind. So as a normal American, without any concept of disciplining the mind, of training the mind, one can be intelligent and get good grades, be in a good university, but still not know anything about samadhi or collectedness of mind. And that's painful when you actually come to try to train the mind. Okay, tell yourself, I'm just going to stay with one object for the next 3 days. And that's painful because you can't do it. You see the limits of an untrained mind, the dukkha of the monkey mind. And first 3 days, a lot of dukkha, but then after that, really seeing that the mind is trainable and seeing and experiencing depths of happiness and heights of happiness and even pleasure, mental pleasure that I had never conceived of before. And this is a type of pleasure that's not dependent on all of the movies and apps and books and music and all the things that I was addicted to without knowing it. So experience a type of pleasure which is independent from all those things, which is amazing to see as a person in their late teens, early 20s. So I come out from these 10 days retreat just with a totally new perspective on life, that the education that I'm getting is very shallow compared to the education of mind, which a meditation retreat or a Buddhist life entails. So this, again, is another pattern of American Buddhists, is that we come to the teachings partially through maybe finding some book. So if we were not raised Buddhist, these are basically the two avenues into Buddhism, is either through reading. Someone recommends we read a book, or we are just naturally inclined, go to a bookstore. And most bookstores in America or Europe, the Buddhism that you'll find in bookstores is either pop Buddhism, so books by Jack Kornfield, the Dalai Lama, and Thich Nhat Hanh. So for discerning listeners, you'll notice that the Dalai Lama is Tibetan Buddhism, and Thich Nhat Hanh is Vietnamese Mahayana / Theravada. He's a mix. And Jack Kornfield is somewhat of a unique American sort of Theravada influenced voice. But you won't really find many Theravada writers in bookstores, at least you wouldn't 15 or 20 years ago. And extremely few Theravada monastic writers. These days, you would be more likely to find books by Ajahn Brahm, but very few by other Western Buddhist teachers. So that's one avenue, coming through the avenue of finding books. Just seeing a text from Bhante Sumita. Good morning, Bhante. It's good to see you. And yes, best of luck on examining your students. So yeah, thank you for inviting me. So, yeah, we come to Buddhism, we as Western convert Buddhists, later in life, so we don't have the depth and the fullness of picture. We're just basing our knowledge on books, and at first, very somewhat shallow books. I mean, the Dalai Lama, Thich Nhat Hanh are great teachers, but you can only get so much in a mass-produced book that's going to be available at Barnes and Noble. So we come through books, or we come through these meditation retreats, and this Goenka tradition, this has produced these days at international monasteries that I've been to, the International Monastery Wat Pah Nanachat in Thailand, or Abhayagiri Monastery, Temple Forest Monastery in America, that cater to Western students and have Western abbots, American or British or Canadian abbots who've trained in Theravāda countries. About half of the monks, half of the monastics come through this Goenka tradition. A lot of people very inspired. This is a very common theme amongst the monks. And oftentimes what happens, you find this with many converts to a new religion, is that once you find this new teaching, new to us, you really want to give your heart to it, your life to it. You find, in comparison to the facile or very basic and rather trivial way that life is lived in America in general, you see glimpses of profundity and depth, and you have a peek. You get to peek at something which can give a life much more meaning than the traditional American narrative, which is so confused, and one of just the highest thing you can seek is our pleasures of the senses, or basically a good job and wealth, basically. So you have a different ideal being pointed to, and another ideal which one becomes aware of when you start looking into these texts is monasticism. You realize sometimes quickly, sometimes over a longer period of time, that the Buddha was actually a monk. You have some vague idea in your mind as a American that, okay, the Buddha wore these robes and the Dalai Lama wears these robes, and you know the word monk, but you don't really know what that means, or haven't thought about the implications of it. But oftentimes when you get this taste of the Dhamma, so having sat this retreat, seeing and tasting the peace of mind, the pleasure of mind, the happiness that can come from a well-trained mind, from training the mind, you see, I want more of this. So it's like a map. So we're introduced to, in the Goenka traditions, you do, after a while, he does have retreats which are on Satipatthana, or the foundations of mindfulness, Majjhima Nikaya, Sutta number 10, Digha Nikaya, Sutta number 22. And from that is very easy for Westerners to have beginnings of faith in. So we start off, if it's a bookish route, it will be through these popular books, but then we start and see, oh, these teachers are basing their teachings on something that's called the Pali Canon, this Buddhist canon, this what the Buddha actually taught. And this is true in my case as well. So after doing this 10-day Vipassana retreat, I say, wow, I want to give my life to this. So I start keeping the 5 precepts: not killing, not stealing, not committing sexual misconduct, not lying, not consuming intoxicants. And as a American college student, that last one took a little bit of time for me, because American college students are crazy, myself included. So it took me a little bit of time to work through that fifth one, but giving my life to that and then seeing, I want more of this. How do I get more? What is Goenkaji teaching really? So start reading about Satipatthana Sutta, and then for myself, I found Access to Insight. So at the time, this was 2002, 2003, up to 2006. The main Theravāda web portal online was accesstoinsight.org. And that was the main place to find translations into English of the Pali Canon. Nowadays, you have Sutta Central, which has full translations by Bhante Sujato and others of the four main Nikayas, the Majjhima, middle length discourses, Digha, long discourses, Sangyutta, connected discourses, and Anguttara, numerical discourses of the Buddha. But at those times, you had only selected suttas of the Pali Canon translated in English, and I fell in love. Started with the Satipatthana Sutta, but then from there, I say, this seems really true. What can I read next? And then started reading other suttas and say, this also feels true. Then am hyperlinked, at the end of these suttas on Access to Insight, it'll say, see also, or if you like this sutta, try this other sutta on a similar topic, or you can go to the subject index and say, I want teachings on friendship, or I want teachings on right speech. I want teachings on livelihood. And you become more and more interested that the Buddha was not just teaching a meditation technique, but was teaching a whole life. He's teaching on how to receive feedback. He's teaching on how to relate to one's parents, how to relate to one's friends. And you find suttas on these things, and you say, this sutta is awesome and very, very true. Okay, let's read more like that. And that takes me to another sutta. This sutta is awesome. I love that. And then you might be taken to another sutta, and that mentions heavenly realms or other things. And it's like, okay, I don't know about that. I'm an American, and that seems weird. Question mark. But these other suttas I really like. So, and they seem really true. So the other stuff about gods and hell realms or other things like that I can't yet get my mind around. Okay, I respect these other suttas enough to say, question mark. Maybe I don't have enough information yet. So I'm not going to throw, toss the baby out with the bathwater. A good analogy that Ajahn Jayasaro, a English monk in Thailand, gives in terms of the development of faith among Westerners, or really for anyone, is that it's like a map. So we find this map, and we're at one corner of the map, and we see that around this area that we're at, there's very clear descriptions of the landscape. So feelings are like this. Speech is like this. If I talk in this way, then people are not going to want to associate with me. If I speak harshly, then people are going to move away from me. The Buddha talked in detail about the dynamics of that. So this is true. This near landscape that's depicted on the map seems very true. I'm starting to have trust in the map maker. Everything that's depicted near me on this map is extremely true. It's more true than the vague map I was operating from before, which is basically a muddled crayon drawing of multiple maps. There's no overarching narrative. There's no overarching map for young person in America, in Europe to operate from. My experience with Christianity or other religions it's not a very clear map. There are so many interpretations, 80 plus Protestant denominations with they've all got their own conflicting maps of the scene. But this Buddhist map that I was finding in the Pali Canon seems more and more coherent. The landscape near me is very clear. And these other teachings on Deva realms, it seems like a different part of the map. But this area of the map where I'm at is so clear that I can say, okay, I'm not to these other places. Nibbana, Nirvana, that seems far away on the map. But that's more and more where I want to head. not only am I having more confidence and even faith in the map maker, but there's a guide who comes along with the map and says, actually, there are all these different locations on the map, these hell realms. Again, you've not been there, you've not seen that, but you don't want to go there. Don't aim in that direction. But you've got nirvana over here, which is a good direction. So having faith in the map and your guide, which is the Tipitaka, the suttas. So more and more getting my mind around that this canon provides a life, overarching life goal and plan that I want to give my life to. So become more and more interested in the Pali Canon, and this is a very common feature of Western, certainly for many convert Buddhists in America and Europe, they will not necessarily go as deep as myself and other convert Buddhist monks have gone in terms of going into the suttas. Many people are content just with a meditative experience of the Dhamma. They sit a retreat and they say, this is really profound, and this is all there is. I'm not interested in any religious overtones of a canon of any sort, even if it seems rational in parts. But for myself and other Buddhist monastics and convert Buddhist monastics, you become more and more interested and wanting to base your life on the Pali Canon. And I feel fortunate that I had the karmic conditions to be able to be born in a time when the Pali Canon, where there are translations and translators of Pali texts into English. At that time, I could not yet read Pali, but you do have translations by Bhikkhu Bodhi and now by Bhante Sujato, which are very good and present the teachings in a very faithful way. So I can read these translations and they're not too far, they're not too exotic. I can get my mind into them. And so more and more I'm reading these suttas, and more I'm becoming exposed to monks. The introduction to these suttas, which I'm reading, is, thus have I heard, at one time the Blessed One was dwelling at some location, Savatthi, together with a group of many bhikkhus, 500 bhikkhus. So what are these bhikkhus? And who is this? Who is he talking to? And you start learning more about the thought world and the narrative history of the Pali Canon. The Buddha was a monk and he was teaching monks what is a monk. And seeing that most of his teachings in this Pali Canon are taught to monks, I became interested. Wow, that's fascinating. Is that still possible? At this time, I was going to university in Massachusetts, attending multiple retreats, Goenka retreats, of these 10-day retreats, even going to live at Goenka centers for periods of time. And then in Cincinnati, Ohio, but still not seeing any monks, did not grow up seeing any monks. But I'm starting to see them in these books, in this Pali Canon, in these readings from Access to Insight at the time. And then another feature of Access to Insight is that it's got translations from modern day Thai teachers at that time, also of Western monks who lived in Sri Lanka, and of Sri Lankan monks and of Burmese monks. So seeing translations by teachings, books by Nyanaponika, who trained in Nyanatilaka, Nyanamoli, etc., who trained in Sri Lanka, but also of Ajahn Mun, Ajahn Mahabua, and Ajahn Jeff, Ajahn Tenisaro, who trained in Thailand. And then a friend recommended the biography of Ajahn Mun, he is the grandfather of the Thai forest tradition of Buddhism. And reading that, I realized, wow, this is a a monk who lived in basically from late 1880s to 1950s or so. And so this is somewhat contemporary. This is a monk, and I'm reading his biography, and it reads like the Pali Canon. And I'm saying, wow, this is not history. This is not ancient history. The Buddhist teachings don't just exist in tiny islands in these Goenka centers, but at least in Thailand, there are monks who are still living it. And if one believes it, and I'm beginning to, because Bhante or Ajahn Mun seems like such a reliable narrator, such an inspiring teacher who values morality, values integrity and honesty, and doesn't seem totally deluded, seems very undiluted by the deluding things of the world. He's living it. He's a monk. And this is possible. So I said, wow, okay, that's interesting. And this is translated into English, so interesting. And then I start reading other works by Thanissaro Bhikkhu, who's an American monk who moved and trained to Thailand in the late 70s, mid 70s. And he's translating and writing fresh commentaries on the Pali Canon and translating works from the Pali Canon. And I learned he's got a monastery called Wat Metta. And this is another common pattern for Western monks. We oftentimes have never seen monks in our life. All of the Sri Lankans, Thais, Burmese, perhaps Indians listening to this would have grown up seeing monks, maybe even offering food into monks' bowls. But us Westerners, we did not. We maybe see a monk on TV, maybe see a billboard of the Dalai Lama, but it's only when we start actively looking into it that we discern that this is a living tradition. Monks are still living and thriving in these Theravāda Buddhist countries, and more in small enclaves, small communities in America, in Europe. So I learned about Wat Metta and say, this is Ajahn Thanissaro's monastery in America, and he's training Westerners. These are, and again, nothing special about Caucasians, but being Caucasian myself, I thought, and this is somewhat unconscious, I'm thinking, okay, maybe it's still possible in Thailand or Sri Lanka or Burma if you're Sri Lankan or Burmese or Thai and you speak the language, but maybe it's not possible for a Westerner. But then learning about Wat Metta, okay, here are people who are like me, and I don't care that they're Caucasian like me, really, but just to know that it's possible, it's not something that's too foreign. They say, wow, okay. It's like the Buddha said in the Dhatu Samyutta many times, the connected discourses on elements. The Buddha said that like elements come together. And so you find these communities of like element monastics coming together. So in America these days, you've got lots of monasteries. But for the most part, in most major cities, you will find a Thai monastery, which is mostly all Thai monks, and most of the people who come to those Thai monasteries are Thai people. Like elements, like dhatus, similar dhatu, this is the Pali word, come together and associate with like elements. Thai people come together at Thai monasteries to support Thai monks. Sri Lankan people come together to support Sri Lankan monks in Sri Lankan temples, even though it's in Toronto or LA or wherever. But you've got these Western monks, and we're a bit broader. So basically like English native-speaking monastics come together and associate with English-speaking senior monks at English-speaking monasteries. And in America, there aren't many of these. You've got maybe just half a dozen. You've got the Bhavana Society, which is Bhante Ji. I mean, he is Sri Lankan, but his English is extremely good. And I don't know if there are so many Westerners that have ordained and stayed there, but that is one place where Westerners go think about ordaining. You've got Abhayagiri Monastery, where I ended up ordaining, which is in California, Redwood Valley. And the abbot there, the two abbots there were British and Canadian, Ajahn Amaro and Ajahn Pasano. And that's now a thriving community of mostly American-born monastics. You've got Wat Metta with Ajahn Jeff, who, as I mentioned, was American-born monk trained in Thailand. And now I believe most of the monks there are American-born monks. You've got Temple Monastery, also in the Thai forest tradition, with Ajahn Jayanto, an American-born monk, grew up in Massachusetts, but trained in England with Ajahn Sumedho of the Thai forest tradition, students of Ajahn Chah. So you've got, and there are maybe a handful of other places, but not so many. And there's nothing, one of the things why this happens about like elements associating and coming together is that I have visited many Thai monasteries in America and a handful of Sri Lankan monasteries in America and some Burmese monasteries in America, but there's somewhat of a language barrier at Thai monasteries, honestly. Most of the monks, in my experience, don't speak English that well. And even the monks who speak English that well were not born in America and can't actually, even if they can translate the language, can't translate the ceremonies, can't really explain in a way which Westerners can understand things which are unfamiliar to us, like bowing and like faith and like Buddha images and all of these things which we're unfamiliar with. But if you have a Westerner who is also a convert Buddhist, Ajahn Pasano, Ajahn Amaro, Ajahn Jayanto, Ajahn Jeff, Ajahn Tanisaro, these monks also had to learn how to understand these. What is this Buddha statue? Is he gonna, if we bow to it, what does that mean? How do we understand all these things we're reading in a way which is not just mystical mumbo jumbo, something which can be taken for granted if one is born in a Buddhist country. But for us convert Buddhists, we actually have to think about all these things to be able to bow to them. And I feel very fortunate to have many, honestly, convert Western Buddhist teachers who have thought these things through and have moved from just a philosophical appreciation of Buddhism that, yes, these tenets seem true. Yes, this Dhamma in the Tipitaka, in these Buddhist books, seem true. It seems true both philosophically, but more than that, I can give my heart to it. So it's not just a brain exercise, but I can bow to these things. And there's something beautiful and something which opens the heart and the mind when I cannot just think about these things cognitively, but actually bow to them. There's something in the gesture of humility when one can give the heart and not just the brain to the teachings, which opens the teachings up to one. And I'm very grateful to have met teachers that do that. And that's one reason I think why these Western enclave monasteries are thriving where they are. Wat Metta, Ajahn, Wat Abhayagiri, Temple Forest Monastery, Bhavana Society, in different ways. They can speak vernacular, they can explain the rituals, but they still do the rituals. We do the chanting, we learn Pali, and we respect the rules, and we learn how to integrate these things in a way which is not just rote and taken on from childhood, but which is meaningful for us and integrates head and heart together. So maybe a bit of a rambly talk and a bit of a biography, but somewhat of an introduction of how a Western monk, specifically myself, but a very common pattern for how Americans can come more and more into the Dhamma and take these teachings into our lives in deeper and deeper ways, which just produce more and more gratitude. So maybe I'll leave the formal talk there and open things up to questions. And yes, so.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you so much, Bhante, for that excellent Dhamma talk. And we really appreciate you sharing your experience, your journey, all the way from Goenkaji tradition, reading books, reading all the suttas, getting the actually trying and developing the mind to be in a purified way. And that was a very quite interesting analogy of the map, where we know the destination, the goal is just Nibbana, and the one way, the right way to follow to achieve that. There are several other ways which does not included in this path, so just avoiding that, but just going the right way, which is very nice, Bhante. And thank you for sharing all the websites and the names of the monasteries as well. So anyone new who want to visit those monasteries, read books, even if it's online or taking a book in hand, Bhante have gave all this information. So really appreciate that as well, Bhante. We'll see if there is any question in the comment section, Bhante.
Okay. And I think I do see the comments. I don't see any questions yet, so I can just continue. I can just continue on. And please, Achanang, uh, if you have any questions, or if you wanted for me to elaborate any specific point, please let me know at any time. And also, if anyone else is tuning in live, feel free to put your comments or your questions in the chat, and we'll try to respond to those. So, yeah, this is just a very common pattern, and it's not always a very smooth pattern. So, in the last 10 minutes of the talk, kind of just jumping from the head to the heart, and oftentimes this is absolutely not something which happens in 10 minutes for most of us. It's a rather bumbling, a rather uh, uh, yeah, faltering process for many of us. So, yeah, maybe just go into these questions. So, here's one: how can one become a monk if someone wants here? So maybe here meaning America. So, yeah, as I mentioned, there are many monasteries in America, both which, for lack of a better word, cater to Sri Lankan communities, or Thai communities, or Lao, or Burmese, or Vietnamese, or Chinese. And some people might have a karmic affinity with that tradition, and find no difficulty with coming to a monastery like that, where, say, the abbot might not speak very good English, or is not able, or where it's a very cultural context, without much explicit instruction going on in English. I don't know. I don't think that I would recommend that for someone who is born in America and has a lot of questions. If you're already a heart type, and already have a lot of faith in Buddhism, then you might not have a lot of questions you need answered. And then going to a monastery where it's just ceremonies happening and meditation happening, then that's great. And you might be able to be ordained there. So just going to a monastery and asking. But there are these specific other places like Abhayagiri Forest Monastery, ABHAYAGIRI.org. That's where I ordained. Wat Metta, WATMETTA.org, I think. That's the monastery where I went first. And these are both great training monasteries for people in America who have a lot of questions. The abbots there are very capable of answering all of our many and varied questions. So, a brief answer. So there are age restrictions in America. Can you explain about the process a little bit? So yes, at many of these monasteries, there are rough age restrictions. So I don't believe in the canon, uh, the the Buddha, as far as I can recall, the only age restriction for ordaining as a fully ordained monk is that one is 20 years of age to get full ordination. For novice ordination, you only have to be old enough to be able to throw a clod of dirt and scare away crows. So usually that's interpreted as age 7. But if you've got an especially precocious kid who can scare away crows at a younger age, maybe they can ordain sooner. But yeah, 20 years of age is the lower limit for full ordination. But many of these monasteries in America and some in the West will have an upper limit. In America, healthcare is difficult. At these training monasteries where I've mentioned, something which we value is keeping the Vinaya rules. So at these monasteries, we don't use money. We give up the use of money when we ordain. So we no longer have a bank account or any funds. If someone wants to donate in our name, then they can just give those funds to the monastery, and then a monastery steward will look after that. But we have no bank account. We have no dollars. We have no wallet to our name. What that means is that we're financially dependent on the monastery. And in America, unfortunately, the healthcare system is quite complicated and a hassle. So we are dependent on the monastery. And for older people in America, and that would include monks, healthcare costs can be very expensive and prohibitory. So if someone was ordained later in life, then it might, in one sense, a financial sense, it could be seen as a financial burden. If someone ordains early in life, then you just age, and the burdensomeness of this is really that is what is in question here. And it, in a Dhammic sense, you can't really measure a burden, certainly not with a dollar value. And so this is at the monasteries I've mentioned, the upper limit. Sometimes they'll say 55, sometimes they'll say 60, sometimes places might even say, usually 55 or 60. But usually, sometimes it's a little bit vague. This is something with Thai cultures that you can be vague with these things. And it's sometimes held as a principle, but I've known monks who are just, they come to the monastery older than 60, but they're very inspiring, very humble, and they can adapt easily and are given ordination after age 60. And it's not seen as even a financial burden to take on these assets because they're just such good people. So it's a general limit of under 60. So, yep. And then just a quick explanation of the process. So at most of these monasteries, it's a longer process than in Asia. So at Abhayagiri, you come, stay as a guest. Usually you're only allowed to stay for 10 days first time. Second time visit, you can request to stay for longer. If you get along with the community, then you can request to stay for maybe 3 months. And if you want to keep wanting to ordain after 3 months, then you say, you can ask permission to ordain as an anagarika, wear white robes, keep the 8 precepts for a year. After a year, you can ask permission to become a novice monk. And if you get along with the community and they get along with you, then they will give you novice ordination for a year. After that, you might have a bhikkhu ordination and then that would usually be given. So you've been living at the monastery for about over 2 years before you're given full bhikkhu upasampada. So that's a general explanation. So where can they get training as proper monks? It's a good thing to do is to elaborate what we mean by proper monks. So I would gloss that term to mean a monk who keeps the Vinaya. So a monk who cares about the disciplinary rules and Yeah, for Americans, I would recommend Abhayagiri or Wat Metta or Temple Forest Monastery. And with Bhante G still being alive at Bhavana Society in West Virginia, he can probably give good guidance as well. I don't know of many other good training monasteries to become to keep the rules well, but there must almost certainly be other good, great monasteries. But just for Westerners, I'm not sure. So how many monasteries for monks and nuns are there in America? In general, if you include all of the small ones that usually cater to specific Asian, usually Asian-born, maybe usually first generation or early second generation people from Asia into America, almost certainly hundreds and hundreds, maybe even over 1,000. Almost every major city in America has some. And that's just with Theravāda. You include Mahayana, the Japanese and Chinese and Korean, and then Vajrayana Tibetan Buddhist monasteries, thousands, almost certainly. But ones that the predominant monastic community are Americans, probably just dozens, maybe not more than 30. Well, if you include all traditions, Zen monasteries and Tibetan monasteries, you might have 50, and that's including small monasteries or hermitages where you just have 2 or 3 monks or nuns, maybe 100. Yeah. Theravāda, maybe not more than 30. Round numbers.
There is one more question. Ajahn, can you share some reflections on how monks from the West can have a better understanding of the background and needs of people who have grown up in a Western culture?
So maybe one of these, I'm not sure, maybe the question was misphrased. So how monks from the West can have a better understanding of people who grew up in Western culture. So like a better self-understanding, or is it maybe have a better understanding of people from the East? I can explain. I can speak to both aspects, and maybe the question could be clarified. But certainly for myself, I did come having the Goenka tradition. It's wonderful at presenting a very stripped down presentation of the Dhamma. There's no Buddha image. There's no chanting. There's no specific language that it's taught in. It's all in English. There's no Buddha statue, etc. So in a sense, many Westerners come and they say, I don't want the baggage of some kind of Asian Buddhism. And I think that's a very extremely limited and honestly ignorant perspective. A lot of the baggage that Western semi-Buddhists or Buddhist-inspired Western meditation practitioners so maybe there's some clarification, but I'll just finish the point that I was going to, is that there is beauty in learning how to bow to a Buddha statue. There is beauty. For myself, I went to Thailand, learned Thai, and moved to Thailand, eventually lived there for 6 years, and learned so much from living in a Buddhist culture. There's so much to learn from people who grew up with these things, about the ways to bow, about the ways to, the gestures of respect, the ways of humility, the ways of generosity, which are so deeply ingrained, the cultural values of filial respect, respect for one's parents, which are just taught to people in these Buddhist cultures, Sri Lanka, Burma, maybe India in parts, Thailand for sure, Laos, but which we just don't grow up with. And so you can see the value in just keeping your eyes open, and you can see the beauty. That's the main thing. Just look for the beauty and accept the beauty of the quote unquote baggage of Asian Buddhism, because there is so much beauty in maybe things which might not have been in the earliest suttas, but which are extremely valuable elaborations over time. And the perhaps elaboration on this one, how to inspire Westerners to become monks and nuns. That's very hard. You can't. Americans, we're very resistant. We're almost allergic to proselytizing. So there's no way that we could go door to door like Mormons do, or like Seventh-day Adventists. Like, it would just, people would slam the door on our face. I think there is a beauty of the way that we do alms round in America is basically quietly, whether it's just quietly walking through a town or just quietly standing outside of a supermarket. So these days, it was mentioned in the biography that I'm now living in Seattle, and we're starting a monastery, myself and my brother monk Ajahn Nisabo, who was featured recently on this channel, starting a monastery in Seattle. And 5 days a week, from Monday through Friday, we go on alms round in America. And that is our only food for the day. We eat the one meal and only food that has been put into our alms bowls on the alms round. What is alms round? We have our bowls and we walk into town, and we stand outside of a bakery. Some people know we're coming and some people don't. And basically we're standing there. We always wear our robes, and people will just ask us, "What are you doing?" And people will become inspired. And this somewhat ties into, people will become inspired when the conditions for them to be inspired are there. So if someone has those conditions, they might come up to us and ask, "What are you?" And we'll try to explain. And that's really the best we can do. Is it ties into that last point that I was making, is for people who can see beauty in virtue, who can see beauty in simplicity and renunciation, then you can see that that's really what we're trying to live. Living off alms is really the most basic way of supporting oneself through food. When people learn that we don't use money, that's inspiring for many Americans. There's many inspiring things. I mean, I think there are many monastic traditions who do use money, and they may likely be a lot far superior to very strict non-money using monks in their knowledge of Pali or their knowledge of the suttas. But there are all sorts of things which can inspire Westerners. And in terms of being monks and nuns, it really has in large part due to their own causes and conditions. All we can do is just try to be good examples, and to try to make the teachings as available as possible, and people will then be inspired where they are. So yeah, that's just some thoughts. Yep.
Yeah, that's a very good explanation. Thank you, Bante. And it's a very beautiful view, and it's one of the wonderful merits to see the monks going on the alms round. It's more amazing merits when we offer the food to them. But yes, we can get inspiration from all the monks who walk so peacefully, even if there are hundreds and more thousands of monks, but they walk so beautifully, and they have that peace, that bliss on their face, that any person who looks on that may get inspiration at looking at how they live this beautiful life. Even in the case of chaotic life outside the world, they are so peaceful and serene, so they may get that inspiration as well. Just like Venerable Sariputta, before becoming the monk, he saw Venerable Asaji, and then he got inspired by it and became the monk and the Arhan. Thank you so much, Bhante, for giving that wonderful explanation. Um,
Yeah, thank you,
let's
Ajahn.
see.
That's great explanation from you too. I'm sorry, I may have spoken over you. There's one follow-up from Rick. Should I maybe address that? And then maybe this can be the final question. But you're so right, that story of Sariputra being inspired. And that's certainly how I was inspired as well. Just seeing good monks, Ajahn Pasano, Ajahn Tanisaro, are just such inspiring living Dhamma really. And that makes me want to continue as a monk. And may I be a monk for the rest of my life. They live such beautiful lives. So maybe, Achanam, could you do that? Okay. Maybe just one putting up Rick's question. I can address that real quickly, and then, yes, thank you. So I was thinking about our background of culture, religion, coming from a society focused on a free market economy and science. How do we... I think it's a common thing that coming from a Western background where there is this emphasis on capitalism, that also is just a matter of keeping your eyes open and seeing the beauty and the ugliness and the smooth roads and the rough roads of the world. And it's pretty easy to, when you open your eyes, to see the ugliness of capitalism, the ugly sides of exploitation and of poverty that exists on the other side of things. And from science, there's so much in Buddhism that really is very scientific, especially just the first person point of view. Western science doesn't quite acknowledge, it's quite skeptical about first person perspective. And Buddhism really takes that as a working first principle, that we do have these feelings which are valid on a certain level, and working from our own perceptions. So the things which are seemingly contradictory of science, maybe our understandings of the Dhamma are incorrect, or perhaps the Buddha's teachings are correct and science is not yet up to that level. So those are the different options. And when questions come up, if there is a dissonance between science and teachings, the earliest teachings of Theravāda Buddhism, I'll usually put a question mark on it, or usually there's some resolution to be found. So maybe end things there. Achanang, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bhante. We have covered almost all the questions. Everyone is appreciating your wonderful talk and sharing this Dhamma journey and sharing the Dhamma knowledge as well, Bhante. With that, we conclude today's Dhamma sharing, and we look forward to meeting you with more insightful Dhamma sharing in the coming weeks. Let's keep our palms together, close to our heart, and pay respect to Venerable Ajahn Kovilo. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May you be always, thank you, Bhante. May you always be well, happy, and healthy, Venerable. We wish that by the power of all the dana, seal, and bhavana activities that have performed during our lifetime and during our whole course of samsara, become one united power. And may it be shared with all the beings. May all the wonderful celestial beings and all the sentient beings receive these merits. May they all be well, happy, safe, wherever they are. And may all your departed ones, including the late preceptors, parents, all ancestors, and all the departed ones also receive these merits. May they be well, happy, healthy, and safe wherever they are. May all of us be able to live life peacefully, comfortably, with good health. May all sentient beings be able to attain that supreme bliss of Nibbana. Thinking thus, let us all recite Sabbitiyo vivajantu sapparogo vinasatu Mate bhavat antarayo Sukhi Digayuko Bhava. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. See you all again next week at the same time and wishing everyone to progress on the path of Dhamma. Please take care, everyone. Thank you. And Bhante, Venerable Ajahn Kovilo, do I have your permission to end this broadcast, Bhante?
Please. Yes.
Thank you so much, Bhante.
Sadhu.